Brian Lehrer on WNYC. Last month, the Department of City Planning released its latest edition of The Newest New Yorkers. That's a comprehensive look at New York City's immigrant population. The report only comes out about once every decade or so, and it offers a snapshot of where the city's immigrants are coming from, where they're settling, how they're contributing to the city's economy, and how those patterns have changed over time. And the city has changed a lot since the last report a little bit more than a decade ago. And while the size of the city's immigrant population has remained remarkably steady, about 3.1 million people, or more than one-third of all New Yorkers, the makeup of that population and where people are living has shifted in significant ways. One major finding, China has now surpassed the Dominican Republic as the city's largest country of origin among foreign-born New Yorkers. Dominicans have been the largest group for decades. Now it's apparently people from China. So we'll dig into that and some of the other major demographic shifts. Sideya Sherman is the director of the New York City Department of City Planning and chair of the City Planning Commission. And we're going to talk about this report with her. Sideya, welcome to WNYC. Thank you so much for joining us.
Good morning. Thank you so much for having me.
You want to start with a little bit about the history of this report? Why does the city produce it? And what does it help us understand that we might not know otherwise?
Sure, absolutely. The Newest New Yorkers report is a report that city planning releases around every decade. And it really is the most comprehensive portrait of our city's foreign-born population. It's critical for the work that we do in city government that we understand who New Yorkers are, where they live, what they need. And so this report is really essential to how we carry out our work. As you shared, our immigrant population in New York City is pretty steady at about 3.1 million. But we certainly are seeing that there are lots of shifts in where people are living, as well as shifts in our sizable immigrant populations. About 1 in 3 New Yorkers is foreign-born. More than half of our city's population speaks a language other than English, and immigrants are essential to our economy, 43% of our workforce. So very, very essential to our local economy. But to speak to some of the shifts that we're seeing, as you noted, we are certainly seeing that Chinese-born New Yorkers have now surpassed those from the Dominican Republic. It's still very close, but a significant shift in our immigrant population. We're also seeing growth in new neighborhoods. Staten Island, really all across the borough, we're seeing a significant growth in immigrant populations. We're seeing that in Southeast Queens, Southern Brooklyn, as well as Eastern Bronx. And so this report, which is also available online and searchable as well, is really essential to how we understand our city's population and how we make sure that we serve New Yorkers.
Right. So let's unpack some of that, because you put a lot of detail from the report in there, and I want to step back on some of those because they're so interesting. First, on kind of the biggest, the biggest number here, forgive me. I was going to go to one thing. I'm not. I'm going to go to something else. Forgive me for changing horses in mid-sentence, folks. About the many immigrants who are here, 3 million or so immigrants, just like 12 years ago, the last time this survey was taken. So how many of those would be people who newly arrived in the last 10 years?
Great question. So there's a constant ebb and flow of immigration in our city. As you noted, the number has remained pretty steady, but that represents around 1 million people that are new to our city that have arrived between 2010 and 2023, and around slightly less than 1 million who have either left our city or have had population decline due to normal factors such as death, for instance. And so this is pretty consistent with the overall patterns that we've seen in immigration throughout our history. There's a constant churn within New York City's immigrant population, but we're seeing that it's holding steady.
Right. So 3 million immigrants. Does that count only foreign-born people, or them plus their children, even if the children were born here?
So this is really a count of our foreign-born population, and that's important to note, right? Because there are many folks who are second and third generation in New York City at this point. And so yet, as you see these shifts, this also represents who are recent arrivals to New York, who are folks that are foreign-born who may have lived in New York for decades, but it does not necessarily account the second generation that they've created here.
Right. So actual immigrants is this 3 million number. And so that many, about as many immigrants who came in the last 10 years would have had to have left in the last 10 years for the 3 million immigrant number to stay stable. And that's same as it's ever been, right? I think you were getting at that. It's such a classic New York pattern. People come here from all over the world. They get a foothold in the United States here, but then many second generation, third generations of those families, they move to the suburbs or elsewhere into the United States, right? I remember when I was traveling around the country, that wherever I was, it would seem like I met two kinds of people: the people from there and the displaced New Yorkers.
Mm. Yeah, I agree. There's certainly that shift. I would also note that we know that affordability is essential to the city. It's essential not only to our population overall, but particularly to our immigrant New Yorkers. And so the mayor has been laser focused on affordability, housing affordability in particular, and our ability to stay a city that is welcoming to all, that is a place where people can get their start, relies on our ability to continue to ensure that it's affordable. At City Planning, we've certainly been focused on that and making sure that we're supporting the mayor's goal to deliver 200,000 new units of housing and help preserve another 200,000.
Yeah, and certainly what may have been a perennial pattern seems to be accelerating these days in terms of the number of middle and working class families who are leaving the city because not because of taxes, but because the private sector economy here is just so unbearable economically for so many people, especially the cost of housing. So one of the big headlines that came out of the report, as we noted, is that China has now surpassed the Dominican Republic as the city's largest country of origin among foreign-born New Yorkers. But tell our listeners, some of whom may not know it, about the history of Dominicans being the biggest group. When and why did they first attain that status?
Sure. And so I would just note quickly that it is a statistical heat between China and the Dominican Republic. We have 397 individuals who are foreign-born from China and 390 from the Dominican Republic. So Dominicans still have
390,000.
390,000.
Yeah.
Exactly. So Dominicans still have a very large presence in our city, and you start to see that presence really in the last, I would say, two decades of our report. You see a significant increase in the Dominican population of our city, and still a large population of second and third generation folks who are in our city. But the Chinese population, there's always been a Chinese population in New York City as well too, but we really have seen a significant growth over these past 10 years.
Are new Dominicans continuing to come at a significant pace?
Absolutely. Again, they're still tied really with China as our largest immigrant populations in the city.
Now tell us about the increase in Chinese immigrants. What was the Chinese immigrant population 10 years ago, and what is it now? How much has it increased?
Sure. So the Chinese population has increased around 5% from the last time we did this report in 2013. And so, this means that Chinese-born New Yorkers represent 12% of all foreign-born New Yorkers. And they, again, are our largest group alongside Dominicans. I think I noted in an earlier part of our interview that we're seeing significant growth in immigrant populations in boroughs like Staten Island. And a lot of that is growth in Chinese population in Staten Island. We're seeing that Chinese-born New Yorkers are really making that trek over the Verrazano from Brooklyn to Staten Island the way many Italian immigrants did just a generation before, and setting up roots across the borough.
Right. When you say Chinese immigrant population, does that include Taiwan as well as the mainland?
That's a great question. I believe that our reporting does include Taiwan, but I want to make sure that we're confirming that, and I'll make sure to just double check.
And do you have anything on the driving push factors causing people from China to leave there?
So, I don't want to speculate on what's not before me in the data. There are many factors that cause immigration, of course. The data that we have really is giving us a sense of who's coming here, but not all of the reasons why. Obviously, New York City, you know, has great economic opportunity, right? It's an attractive place to come. As many cities saw decline in the 1950s and 60s and 70s, part of what has kept New York City vital is that it's had an economy that's been attractive to immigrant groups. And so there are many reasons and many factors that folks are coming here, but we don't know all of the reasons why we're seeing such a large population of Chinese immigrants in particular. And to get back to your question regarding Taiwan, yes, the Chinese-born population does include mainland China, Taiwan, and Hong Kong.
And who has the New York City demographics question for our guest, Sideya Sherman, the director of the Department of City Planning? She oversaw the latest report about the newest New Yorkers, as it's called, and all the many demographic shifts we've seen in the past decade or so. So we're inviting your questions about this latest study and what it tells us about the city. Or maybe this is your story. If you are somebody who immigrated from China in the last 10 years or even before that, and you're just familiar with other people who are coming in now, or from the Dominican Republic, which has been the number one country from which immigrants have come to New York City really since the 1965 Immigration Act, which loosened the country quotas and allowed family reunification as a legal reason for coming in. A few years after that, people from the Dominican Republic became number one, and we're number one in terms of the immigrant population in New York City for so many years now. It's people from China, which of course there's so many more people in the Dominican Republic. It would seem almost inevitable if we assume that demand is roughly similar in percentage terms for coming to New York. But Dominican listeners, Chinese listeners, anyone with a demographics question, 212-433 WNYC, tell us your story or ask a question, 212-433-9692, call or text. One thing especially interesting in the report, and you touched on this a couple of minutes ago, is that some of New York's neighborhoods that have historically been home to big immigrant communities, places like Washington Heights, Manhattan's Chinatown, Jackson Heights, have actually seen declines in their foreign-born populations, while Staten Island, which you mentioned, Southeast Queens, parts of the Eastern Bronx have seen an increase. What's driving those shifts? Is it mostly about housing affordability, or are there other factors too?
Sure. We think there are a multitude of factors. And again, this once again follows the pattern that we've seen with immigrant groups across our city for many generations. Neighborhoods like Flushing still remain our largest immigrant hub. 66% of the population in Flushing is foreign-born. Washington Heights still has a large foreign-born population of 44%. But we are seeing folks begin to move to new neighborhoods. I mentioned Staten Island. I know that there's a draw there in terms of housing affordability, particularly if folks are looking for opportunities for home ownership. We're seeing that in Southeast Queens, which has a growing Caribbean population, as well as a growing Bangladeshi and West African population, and the Bronx. So people are traveling to different neighborhoods where they can find housing affordability, where they can set up roots, where they're finding community. And we also are seeing in some of the neighborhoods that have been our traditional immigrant hubs, like Jackson Heights, for instance, that there's still a large foreign-born population, but also there are second-generation, third-generation populations in those communities as well, because people have been there for quite some time.
Listener writes, does your guest have any information on the class breakdown of Chinese immigrants? Are there a larger portion of high-income, foreign-born Chinese immigrants coming for education, for instance? What do you say to that listener?
That's a great question. We do have some socioeconomic profiles of immigrants in New York, but it really captures the profile here in New York City. That is certainly a question that we can dig into a little bit more. And there's some information in our report that provides a socioeconomic breakdown, but there's not one specific story. I think we're seeing Chinese immigrants across a variety of socioeconomic status, although, as noted, we are seeing folks who are professionals who are able to buy homes, for instance, traveling from Brooklyn to Staten Island and having the means to do that. But we're also seeing people on a lower end of the economic spectrum as well.
Also on reasons for Chinese emigration, Peter in Fresh Meadows is calling in. Peter, you're on WNYC. Hi.
Yes, first time caller, long time listener. Love your show. I had an ex-girlfriend from China, and her family wanted to come here and live the American dream, have lots of kids, own their own business, and not have to worry about the government seizing control of their assets. And, we need them to do all the jobs that Americans won't do. I mean, they built our railroads, right? They taught us vegetation.
Going back, centuries. And Peter, thank you very much. Yeah, and we can get a little bit into the workforce because this, of course, Director, is such a national story right now. There are shortages starting to pop up of workers in various industries and in the healthcare workforce to some degree because of the deportation push by the current administration in Washington. We're going to be talking more about that later this hour with guests, including one of those Dominican immigrants, City Council member Carmen De La Rosa. Maybe you heard about the incident in her district the other day where a masked ICE agent pepper sprayed a woman who was protesting ICE, holding up a camera, just her phone, videotaping the ICE agent, and she wound up videotaping him pepper spraying her. Carmen De La Rosa from City Council, a Dominican immigrant once upon a time, is going to be talking about that. But what the caller brings up is Chinese people escaping the Chinese Communist Party and the way they rule. I guess you don't have a lot of detail on motivation in that respect. How much of that is like escaping communism, as we might have thought about Soviet emigres once upon a time.
Mm-hmm. Yes, we don't have that level of detail in terms of motivation, but we know that many people have come to our city and our country seeking freedom, right, seeking democracy, and it is even more important in this moment that we uphold that. I think you spoke to really abusive federal immigration enforcement that we're seeing across our country. It's certainly meant to destabilize, it's meant to sow fear, and so it's even more important in this moment in our city that we, again, reaffirm our commitment to being a sanctuary city and really making sure that we're upholding protections for immigrant New Yorkers at this time.
Let me ask you if this report on immigration trends to New York in the last decade or so seems to reflect some other things in the news. For example, can we see the effects of COVID in this report in any way?
Sure. So we can see within the past decade the population decline overall in New York City, including immigrant New Yorkers, right around the time of the pandemic. We do see that in the report, and we see that we've bounced back. Our city is at 8.5 million New Yorkers. Our immigration to New York City within the last year is pretty consistent with what we've seen pre-pandemic levels. And so you do see the shift in overall city population, immigration, but you also are seeing that the city has started to bounce back and that we're back.
And immigrants now make up 43%. It was over a third of New York City's population. It's over 43% of New York City's workforce, according to the report. Can you say which industries rely most heavily today on immigrant workers?
Sure. So 43% of our workforce, you find immigrant New Yorkers across every industry in the city. I think you named healthcare as a particular sector where you see immigrants really at all spectrums of the industry. Obviously, New York City has a large service economy as well too, and so we're seeing immigrant New Yorkers across all sectors. I think it's important to note too that our immigrant population typically is disproportionately younger than the average person, right? So folks are coming here in their prime working ages, 25 to 44. And really entering the workforce and play a really significant role in our workforce because of that.
Listener asks in a text, on the New York City immigration study, out of these 3.1 million, what percentage is undocumented? Do you know?
So this report captures all foreign-born New Yorkers, including those who are undocumented. We do not disaggregate the undocumented population within the report, but they are included.
And do you have anything, as we get back to things in the news, that may be affecting the immigrant population? The current Trump administration has only been in office, for a year and a half now. but we know the mass deportation campaign that they're on. Have you seen it affecting these numbers at all? Are you in a position to judge in city government or to measure that?
So, based on this report, it's hard to see that at this time because, again, it's a composite of an entire population. So it doesn't capture any specific moment at time. But we know that current federal immigration enforcement, the impacts on temporary protected status, particularly for our Haitian community here in New York City, certainly can serve to destabilize our city as well as impact many, many families and employers and other stakeholders who care about immigrants. And so while we don't see that in the report, we know that we're seeing it in our communities, right? And it's important that, again, as a city, that we're making sure that people are taking advantage of the resources we have. If I can, I would just plug that we do have legal resources available for folks who have questions about immigration and their immigrant status through the Mayor's Office of Immigrant Affairs. That number is 800-354-0365. Again, it's 800-354-0365 for those who may be impacted or know those who are.
Do you have anything from the city planning department standpoint on developing labor shortages in any particular industries? I know I saw one article, and this was, I think, a national angle, not a New York specific angle, about assisted living facilities winding up with labor shortages and, given the prevalence of immigrants in that workforce.
So we don't have that data at hand just yet. Again, we know, though, that the impact of this type of immigration enforcement can be destabilizing to communities and to our economy. We also know that the lack of affordability in our city can be destabilizing to communities. And that's why at City Planning, we also are very much focused on making sure we're supporting the production and increased production of housing across our city and affordable housing in particular, so that this remains a place that's affordable to immigrant communities.
Alan in Brighton Beach, you're on WNYC. Hi, Alan.
Hi, Brian. First of all, I have to say that I'm going to kind of cheat. And before I get to the topic, I have to say I have listened to your program. I've listened to this time slot since well before you were here. And if this were a baseball game, you would be viewed as the starting pitcher, the relief pitcher, the star batter. I mean, you have done everything possible at WNYC, including even hosting on the media for a period of time. Oh, and pinch hitter. Okay, so let me
very
get
nice
to
of you.
question.
Hopefully there will be no lockout next year that affects me. Anyway, that's a baseball joke, but go ahead.
Okay. The link between immigration, where immigrants go, and transportation, and the major growth in the city subway system was when the MTA and New York City Transit Authority took over the independent private subway system. There's been relatively speaking, almost no growth in the subway system since then. And so my question is, what, if anything, is the city and the state doing with regard to reaching those areas where there's plenty of good housing but horrible transportation?
It's a great, Alan, I have to leave it there just because your phone is breaking up so much, but it's a great question, right? Housing affordability, and I mean, maybe areas of the city that don't have great mass transit are affordable for exactly that reason. But it was interesting to me in the context of Alan's question that you cited Staten Island as a place of particular growth among new immigrants because, of course, transportation outside of the borough is so limited.
Yeah, that's a great question. So as you know, the mayor has had a focus on our city's bus system and making sure that we're speeding up times on the bus system, which will really help reach many of these communities. Back in my day, we used to call them two-fare zones, but communities that are a little disconnected from the subway system and where folks need relief in terms of their commute. And so we're really excited to see a really massive plan that's rolled out from the Department of Transportation to increase bus times. We know that the MTA is also investing in new transit systems like expansion of the Metro North and parts of the Bronx, as well as the IBX in Brooklyn at city planning, we recently launched a neighborhood plan focused on the neighborhood south of Prospect Park in Brooklyn, where the community will actually intersect with the future IBX line. So there's certainly work to do to make sure that more New Yorkers who are in communities that don't have the best transit connections have various transit options. I would also add that we at City Planning are also focused on how do we increase the amount of New Yorkers who live in communities that are already transit rich. We know that there are neighborhoods across our city that are really stymied by outdated zoning, that are transit rich communities where we certainly could significantly increase the amount of housing in those neighborhoods, as well as affordable housing, to make sure that New Yorkers are living closer to transit. So I think it goes both ways, right? Increasing the quality and the access to transit across our city, but actually making sure that we're maximizing opportunity to bring more New Yorkers closer to the many rich transit communities that we already have.
You know, this was really interesting, but I feel like we just scratched the surface. Maybe we'll have to do a part two, because we've certainly talked about the groups that are number 1 and 2 or tied for approximately tied for number 1 in terms of the foreign-born population in New York City, people from China, people from the Dominican Republic. But we could also be talking about people from South Asia, India, Pakistan, Bangladesh, etc. We could be talking
Colombia.
about a lot of people, Colombia, elsewhere in Latin America, West Africa, some East Africa. So maybe we'll do it again. But just take our last 30 seconds or so, since we only had you on to talk about this particular report from your agency, to maybe say what you would consider your number 1 or 2 goals as the chair of the City Planning Commission and director of the Department of City Planning under Mayor Mamdani. Do you have it that way? And you say,
Sure.
Okay, 4 years, my number 1, my number 2. Here's how you should assess me 4 years from now.
Sure, absolutely. Our number 1 goal is to address affordability and to make sure that we're addressing housing affordability, particularly through the work that we're doing at City Planning. That means, again, addressing outdated zoning that has stymied communities and supporting growth in communities, making sure that we're using fair housing to animate all the work that we're doing, which means making sure more neighborhoods are accessible to New Yorkers to live and build their families in, and really making sure that we're advancing housing that's smart, right? Climate-friendly housing near transit, so that we're ensuring that this city is one that can grow and can grow in a way that uses the infrastructure that we have. And so that has really been our focus, in addition to all the various work that New York City Department of Planning does, the focus on our economic work, as well as our climate work, and many other facets of the agency. And so we would love to come back, certainly, and talk about some of our priorities. But I think this report illuminates, right, how critical it is that New York City remain affordable, so that it's a place where all people can come, build their lives, and really contribute to our economy.
Sideya Sherman is the director of the Department of City Planning and chair of the City Planning Commission. Thank you so much for joining us today. Really interesting.
Thank you for having us. Thank you.